The eve of the crusade is here, and that means KVK is just around the corner for Kingdom 254. That also means we're soon going to be seeing a lot of swarming of flags and fortresses. But what are the right commanders and right marches for swarming flags and fortresses in KVK? Well, I've ranked all of the legendary commanders from top to bottom and graded them all out in terms of their ability to swarm flags and fortresses, and you're not going to want to miss it, so stick around. What's up, everybody? PsychOut here with the Rise of Kingdoms video. In this video, I'm going to be talking all about swarming flags and fortresses. Look, the swarm meta has been the meta in KVK for quite some time, and with the most recent changes to crystal technology, adding swarm tech at the very end, it's even more inevitable than ever that you are going to be swarming flags and fortresses. But not all commanders are equally gifted at swarming flags and fortresses. And in fact, I've seen a lot of situations where people are swarming with really, really terrible commander choices. But it might surprise you a little bit because some of those commander choices are really seen as meta commanders. They just aren't very good for swarming flags and fortresses. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you a legendary tier list of all of the legendary commanders, ranked from top to bottom in terms of their grade for swarming flags, for swarming fortresses. And really, it's just based on experience, but it's also based on a whole number of other things that we've seen when we talk about swarming flags and fortresses. Other things we've seen in battle reports, but also it's just some analytics and different skills and things that commanders have. It's not like I went and tested every single one of these commanders and graded them out from top to bottom empirically, but a lot of this I think bears out pretty well empirically if we were to run those kinds of tests. So I want to say a couple of things before we get into this. The first thing you should know about swarming flags and fortresses, and I'm going to get off of this screen here for a little bit, but if you're swarming a flag or if you're swarming a fortress, the first thing you should know is that there's only a certain number of marches that are allowed to hit that at a single time. Now, if you're swarming passes, that limit is 3. For flags or fortresses, I think it's either 10 or 12. I want to say 10, but it might actually be 12. They're allowed to swarm that at any given time. That means the other marches that are going around are taking up space. They're not actually hitting the flag. That also means that every march that you have on the flag is taking up one of those critical spots. And so there's a couple of things that are really obvious, smart swarming strategies. Number one, don't swarm with low marches. You don't want to be swarming a flag if your march is below 50% health, is in the yellow or in the red zone. You want to be swarming when your marches are full on health or in the white zone. Typically, people will advise when you get down to yellow or red just to pull off the flag because there are probably other marches trying to swarm at the same time, and that allows one of those marches to get in. So that's one thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know, and this is probably more important and really should have been the first thing I mentioned about swarms, almost always one of those marches that's hitting a flag or a fortress in a swarm situation is a rally. And I see a lot of kingdoms make mistakes, and including our own kingdom sometimes makes mistakes in not filling the rally. The rally is doing the most damage, more damage than anything else to that flag or the fortress. And so if you're swarming it, that's doing some extra damage, but really the rally is the thing doing the main damage. The goal of the swarm is to try to accelerate that damage a little more quickly, and to keep the enemy from filling it so fast so that you can burn that flag or burn that fortress. But you can only do that really fast if you're getting the main source of damage. So you want to max out, right? You're going to get better trades on your swarms if that rally is full. So keep the rally full. That's a really essential part of swarming. That should really be your first priority, keeping the rally full. Second priority, swarming and making sure you're getting the right marches in terms of their health on the swarm. Now, speaking of what marches to use on the swarm, and that's what this video is really about, because I see a lot of people swarming with what I would consider to be pretty bad marches. I'm going to switch over here to an Excel file where I have all the legendary commanders. I didn't bother doing it for epic commanders, but I will make a couple of points here on some epic commanders. There are some epic commanders if you're in the very, very early game that are probably worth consideration of swarming. One is actually Boudica, if this is super early, because she does have, she does do a lot of skill damage. And by the way, these are the real keys to swarming. What are the kinds of things you're looking for? You're looking for something that does a lot of damage really fast, right? The idea on the swarm is to hit that thing as hard as you can so that they can't keep it full, so that you can get that burn and move on to the next objectives, right? So that means you want to do a ton of damage as fast as possible. You also don't care about AoE. Unlike field fighting, you usually don't care much about AoE and swarming. You really care about single target damage, and so usually it's that single target damage that you care the most about. Another thing you're looking for is debuffs, and one reason to like Boudica, the old Boudica here, is, where is it here? I guess it is actually on her first skill. Not only does she has a pretty good damage factor for an epic, again, this is only for the early game. This is not advice for late game swarming. In the early game, you could swarm with an epic commander like Boudica because she does do some damage, and she reduces the rage by 100. Thing is, in the early game, swarming is not really the meta. The meta really, swarming meta really comes in later on in the game. But in the early game, if you are swarming in KVK 1 or pre-KVK 1, then Boudica Prime would be a reasonable candidate. Another epic commander that's pretty good for swarming is Bjorn here, because he actually increases the amount of skill damage, right? That's a big debuff. And that's another thing you're going to be looking for in commanders that will be swarming flags or fortresses, commanders that do debuffs, right? So you want a ton of damage very fast. You also want debuffs. Bjorn puts a big debuff, increasing the skill damage that target will take by 15%. That's pretty good. And then I think this new epic commander, there he is here, Imhotep, does something similar, right? So it increases the damage that they take by 20%. That's a pretty good debuff. And so if you are in the early game and you are thinking about swarming with epic commanders, these would be the epic commanders I would be wanting to include in the swarms. But this video is all about those legendary commanders. I'm going to flip over to the Excel spreadsheet now and show you what those rankings look like. So, okay, here we are on the Excel spreadsheet. I've got it color-coded a little bit, but I've also graded them by a letter grade. I can try to zoom in. Let me actually zoom in here a little bit, make this a little bit easier, hopefully, to see. Let me just slide this over, and we'll give it one more zoom here, or two. There we go. All right, so maybe this is a little bit easier for you to see, or at least I hope it is. And again, I've got these color-coded in terms of, and I'll talk about what the colors mean in a second, but I also have them graded from S at the very, very top. These are the best commanders for swarming. And by the way, they are not rank ordered within that grade. So anything with an S grade here, I'm considering those all to be the same for now, although I will have some comments on which ones I think are the very best here at the end. And then there's the A tier, there's the B tier, C tier, D tier, all the way down to F tier. And what these color codes mean is green is, yes, these are meta swarm commanders. You can swarm with these commanders if you have them nearby and it makes sense to swarm with them. Go ahead and swarm with those commanders. B is sort of like, okay, there are certain circumstances where maybe that's a commander you would involve in a swarm. It's probably not optimal. I wouldn't recommend doing B. I really recommend sticking to only these commanders here that are in the green. But in a certain circumstance, you may be forced to use a B commander in a swarm. C commanders are really very, like, maybe in the certain kind of kingdoms, maybe if you're in a really old kingdom that is, but really a low spend, right? It's a very low seed, a very low spend kingdom where people don't have the best commanders. They don't have the best commanders maxed. You could consider swarming with some of these commanders. Hannibal does offer a debuff. Ramses offers a decent amount of single target damage, but really these are not commanders you want to be swarming with in most circumstances, so I would avoid that. And these commanders down here are really commanders that you should really never swarm with. You should never consider swarming a flag with these commanders. There are some differences, like, you know, Richard gets a D because he's better than, say, Zenobia at swarming. I mean, these garrison commanders are pretty bad. And of course, all the gathering commanders down there should never be swarming with. But there are some other ones here, right? Attila, not a good commander for swarming. Doesn't do a ton of damage on its own. No skill damage. It just isn't a great commander for swarming, for trying to bury that garrison, right? You want to get that garrison to zero as fast as possible. Attila might take a good trade on the swarm, but that's not really what you're after. You're not there for the good trade. What you're there to do is burn that flag or burn that fortress, and Attila just doesn't get the job done. Same thing with Pakal. Same thing with Harold, who I think, where is Harold? I think he's on here somewhere. There he is right there. Yeah. So same thing with Pakal, same thing with Harold. Again, they do a decent amount of single target damage, but they're really not, that's not what you're using those commanders for. You're using those commanders to try to get good trades. You're not using those commanders to burn or do a ton of damage really quickly to a single target. Not great for swarming. So I would absolutely at all costs in any circumstances avoid swarming with any of these commanders here. These could be for very particular, very peculiar kingdoms where they don't have a ton of commanders for whatever reason. These could be in some sort of mid-game situations or very early in the season of conquest where you don't really have a lot of choices. Again, maybe you're a low seed kingdom and you don't have a ton of choices. If you're coming into Season of Conquest, maybe El Cid is one of your best swarming commanders because you've expertised him through Mightiest Governors or something like that. You could possibly do it. But again, really not recommended. For any late game, for any big, serious kingdom, these are the only commanders right here that should ever be used to swarm a flag or a center fortress. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these commanders. That way you can sort of understand why these commanders make the list. And again, this order is not in order of which ones I think are the best. These are just all the ones that you can use and probably should consider using when swarming a flag or a fortress. So XY, one of the reasons that we want to use XY for swarming is, well, actually I'm going to jump over into the game so we can see exactly what I'm talking about when we look at his skills. So let me jump back over here. And let's jump back to the top of my list. Okay, so XY is at the top of our list. One of the reasons we like XY for swarming, one is he does a lot of damage. The damage factor isn't huge compared to some of the more recent commanders, but he does fire skills very rapidly because of his skill reduction, his rage reduction for his skill cost. So he's going to be doing a lot of skill damage. He also does a 30% defense reduction, which is really, really strong. Very good commander for swarming. The only problem with this defense reduction is it is often offset by one of the other top swarming commanders, and that is Nevsky. Nevsky does do even more skill damage, single target, and he has a bigger defense debuff. Especially when that target is surrounded, which it obviously will be when you're swarming. So Nevsky is really a premier commander for swarming because of that extra debuff that he gives. He gives a bigger defense debuff, which actually overwrites the XY debuff. So you may not be getting the benefit of that XY debuff if you already have a Nevsky in the swarm. In fact, if you already have a Nevsky in the swarm, you probably shouldn't really go with the XY. You probably have some better choices to bring to the swarm if you already have a Nevsky in there. One of the reasons Nevsky is so great is because not only does he get this when the target is surrounded, he also gets, I believe it's on one of these skills here. Yeah, they take 5% reduced damage from surrounded targets, and they deal 10% increased damage to surrounded targets. So he gets a lot of bonuses here for surrounded target. And I think does he have something else for surrounded targets as well? Maybe not. Yeah, maybe those are the only ones for surrounded targets, but that's just really strong. Nevsky, if you've ever swarmed with Nevsky, you know why. He's really good at swarming, and then he gets really, really good trades. So XY and Nevsky, they're both in the S tier for swarming. I believe also on the list of S tiers, and I'll jump back over to the list here in a minute, is Boudica Prime. Boudica Prime is really good at swarming for a couple of reasons. Number one, she has a very big skill damage. We talked about that already. That's one of the things you're looking for in a swarm, something that does a lot of damage very quickly. The other thing that she does is she increases the skill damage that target takes by 35% for 3 seconds. So that's a big debuff. So we've got big skill damage, we've got a big debuff. Top of the line, S tier swarm march is anything with Boudica Prime. And I will talk about pairings and marches here in a minute. Right now, I'm just talking about the individual commanders that you would actually want to have involved in the swarm. How you pair them up can change a little bit, but really, these are the commanders that are probably best for swarming. Let me jump back over to the list to make sure I am not screwing up what I'm talking about here. So, right, we've covered XY, we've covered Boudica Prime, we've covered Nevsky. We should also cover Trajan. Let me jump back over there. I know he's at the top of my list as well. Trajan is also really good for swarming for a couple of reasons, not because he does a lot of damage, but because he does this buffing and the debuffing, right? So he adds rage to your allied troops by 50, which is going to increase their skill damage firing rate. And they also get to do an additional 30% skill damage as well, right? So you're adding more skill damage from your nearby commanders. And if you have mixed troops, I think is it this one here? Yes, right. So so this deals increased damage. I thought he actually had, no, that's not it. Okay, so this isn't what I thought it was. Wait, they will deal additional direct damage to the target and increased damage dealt to target. Okay, so it just increases the damage that he deals. So it's not that big of a debuff. The real thing you're looking for with Trajan is this one here, is the extra rage and of course the extra skill damage that he is adding. I know another S tier commander is Guan Yu. In fact, I'm just going to say it right now. Guan Yu is my absolute favorite commander for swarming anything, flags, fortresses, whatever it is. And that is because of his first skill with that silence. And his silence lasts for 3 seconds. It's very, very powerful. I wish I had recorded this. One of the biggest regrets I have so far in recording for Rise of Kingdoms is that there was a flag we swarmed in the last KVK, and we were all on voice chat, and we said, we're going to do it with 10 Guans. We've got a rally coming, 10 Guan Yus. That's the only thing allowed to swarm this flag is Guan Yus, and it was a Xeno YSS garrison, and it was absolutely mind-blowing what happened. We swarmed that flag for 1 or 2 minutes before it burned. Xeno never used her skill. Never got to use the skill. The silence from Guan Yu's chained for the entirety of the fight. And the Xeno YSS never got to use its skill the entire time. It could never use that Xeno heal. And the Xeno heal is a really powerful part of what makes the Xeno an effective garrison. But it could not do that because Guan Yu just kept, all of the Guan Yus just kept a constant silence chain on that Zenobia. And that was it. GG, the flag got burned. So when done properly, Guan Yu as a swarm march is just so incredibly powerful. He is my favorite. Very close behind is Nevsky, who we've already talked about him, why he's so good at swarming. But Guan Yu, my favorite for swarming. AOE, he's got the silence. Don't care about the AOE, but he does have a pretty good sized direct damage factor at 2,000, which is really, really strong. And then he also has an additional damage bonus that he can do. So again, you're doing a lot of damage, but mostly you are silencing that target, ending its inability to do any skills for a really long time. All right, jumping back over to our list again, right? So we've covered these 4 here. We've covered Guan Yu. The other S tier ones, we see Joan of Arc Prime, Alexander the Great, Tomyris, and Mulan. So let's jump back over and talk about why those commanders are so good at swarming as well. All right, so Joan of Arc Prime, one of the reasons that she's really good at swarming, again, tons of damage, right? In this case, it's 2,000, which is the same as Guan Yu's, really big damage, but she also has this 4th skill, which triggers it again. Sorry, is it the 4th skill? Yes, there's the 4th skill, which triggers it again, so she's getting that damage more often. She's also adding 5% damage bonus to nearby marches for 3 seconds. That's really, really powerful, so we get this buff, we get a ton of damage to the target, and she's adding rage restored to nearby marches as well. It's just really premier, excellent march for swarming. If you have Joan of Arc nearby, she's a great candidate for swarming. The other ones in the S tier, we also have Alexander the Great. Not so much here for the shielding, but one of the things that we really like is that, again, when he's expertised, if there's only that one target there, right, he is going to be debuffing that target. And that means that target is going to be taking 30% increased damage for 4 seconds. Very, very powerful debuff. Really, really good if you're trying to swarm down a flag quickly. Again, you've got all the skill damage and all those other things firing off. Alex is great for that. He does have some decent amount of skill damage here on his 2nd skill, and there's actually no cooldown on this. This thing can fire off a whole bunch or could not fire it off at all. So you kind of get lucky or unlucky with that. But this debuff here is really strong, and that makes Alex a very good candidate for being involved in swarms. The other commanders I have listed there as S tier, I know Tomyris was one, and the reason for that is here on the 4th skill, she adds these stacks of poison, which is going to increase the skill damage that target is going to be taking. So it doesn't really matter if you have, I mean, it doesn't do a ton of damage factor here. It does do some more when those poison stacks build up. But really, that's what you're trying to do is increase the skill damage that garrison is taking, so that all those other marches doing skill damage are doing a ton to it. Now, I've already forgotten one of the commanders here. Let me jump back here and take a look. Oh yes, Mulan. That is the other S tier commander that we have on our list. And the reason for this is because not only does she do lots of buffs in terms of attack, defense, and health for your nearby marches, a lot of the marches anyway, that are hitting, that are also involved in the swarm. She also increases when she uses her active skill, she increases the damage that the target will take by 20% from all sources for 3 seconds. Again, so much like Alexander the Great, this is a very strong debuff that will just actually wreck a garrison when it's allowed to hang around there for a while, will really overpower the strength of the rally and the other swarmers hitting that garrison. So those are the S tier commanders. Those are the top. If you have those available, sorry about that. If you have those available, those are the ones you should be using. These S tier commanders right here are just absolutely premier. Of course, in many cases, you always want to use, anytime you're using Milan, you always want to use her as the secondary because you get that extra bonus that I just described. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about the A tier commanders, why you want to use them as well, or you might use them as well. These are the main ones. If you can get all of these, if you can get all Guan Yu's, like I talked about earlier, that's fantastic. Just go with that. But these are the ones you really want to use. But if you've got these nearby, they're not bad either. Nebu is really strong because not only does he have a decent damage factor for a single target, but he also reduces the rage of that target by 100, which is really, really good as well. Aetheflaed, she's okay. She does a decent debuff, but the health debuff is often overwritten by some other marches there, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But if you don't have a health debuffing march on there, Aetheflaed's really strong. Her defense debuff won't come into effect, and I'll jump over just so that we can actually see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's go to Aetheflaed. Where is she? I think I finally took her to level 60. But I still can't find her. There she is. Okay. So the damage factor is not super strong here. You're going to be hitting a single target, 800 damage. That's really nothing. These 30% reductions are decent, but again, Nevsky or XY are already going to be giving a defense reduction, so you're not going to get much credit for that. The health reduction is really nice. The attack reduction is not so bad either. So those debuffs are pretty good, and that's the reason why you would want to include Aetheflaed. I believe also on the A tier list is Minamoto. The reason you would care about Minamoto is because of this one right here. Again, he has a chance of increasing the damage that target will take from all sources by 30% for 3 seconds. This is a really powerful debuff as well. For a long time, when the one troop debuffs used to work, people would one troop with Minamoto. You don't have to do that anymore. Now you would actually have to swarm. So you can bring Minamoto in as a swarm march. Again, I wouldn't be using Minamoto on the field, and I think that's what's really interesting about this list. There are certain commanders that I probably wouldn't use on the field. Like, I wouldn't really want to use Tomyris on the field that often unless I really had to. I wouldn't want to use Minamoto on the field either. I don't think they are premier field commanders, but they are premier for swarming. And so Minamoto makes the list for swarming as well. Jumping back to our Excel list, we've got Aetheflaed, we've got Minamoto. The last two on our list are Gilgamesh and Henry, both archer commanders. And I will talk about why those commanders are really strong as well. I don't have Henry, so I'll have to scroll all the way down to find him, and I do have Gilgamesh unlocked here. The reason we care about Gilgamesh, obviously, if you're swarming as Zenobia, there's big advantages there because I think of, which one is it here? He has, is it his expertise? Yeah, this blood craving, right? The blood craving thing is very powerful, and it does a lot to Zenobia, but that's not the whole reason you're bringing him. The real reason you're bringing him is because he does reduce their health by 30% for 3 seconds. So, look, if you're putting a march together, an archer march that you want to bring in as a sort of a debuffing march, that is really good for a swarm. A march like Gilgamesh with Tomyris is actually really powerful. You're getting this health debuff. You're adding stacks of poison. It's a really, really good combo if you are trying to do some extra debuffs as a swarm march. Gilgamesh is really good there. The other one is the other A tier commander. The last A tier commander is Henry. Henry, relatively recent. A couple of things that he has. One is he does 2,300 skill damage or direct damage factor, which is pretty strong. The other thing that he does is he increases the, reduces the skill damage that you take by 30%. But I thought he also has, yes, this is one that he has here. When attacking strongholds and cities, he does more counterattack damage, which is really good, and has a 10% chance to increase the skill damage taken by the target by 10%. Well, when we've expertised him, it's up to 30%. And there's a 5-second cooldown on that. So again, we're adding the amount of skill damage that the target has taken. These are passive skills. So if we have Henry and we have Mulan and we have Trajan. Trajan's is an active skill, but we have Tomyris. All of those will stack together to just add a tremendous amount of skill damage that the target is going to be taking and going to be really hurting badly from those skills when those other commanders are firing off their skills. So that's really the list. I'm going to talk about one more little thing here. So these commanders are all really the ones you should use. You shouldn't use anything below this, as I've already mentioned. But there are some other commanders you might be surprised to see a little lower on the list. And some of these commanders are commanders that you will use in the field quite frequently. For example, YSG is used in the field all the time. And it's okay if you're involved in a swarm, but he doesn't really do any debuffs. He just really buffs himself. The main place that YSG is really good is in the field. Now, you might have him, and I said Boudica Prime or Trajan. That is not what I meant. I went Boudica Prime or Nebu. If you have a march like Boudica Prime YSG or a march like Nebu YSG, then it's okay. Go ahead and you can use that march to swarm. Nebu is an A tier, and of course, Boudica Prime is an S tier, so it's okay if that's the march you're using. But you really wouldn't want to go out of your way to get YSG involved in the swarm. Same thing with CPO Prime. You don't really want to swarm with him. A very common march, though, is Guan Yu with CPO. And so if you're out on the field and now it's time to swarm, and you're transitioning from field to swarm and you don't have time to go back to your city, Guan CPO is okay to swarm with, but it's not really that great. You don't really benefit that much from the CPO. He's just okay for the swarm. You would much rather have a Guan with Alex. So that is, if you have time to set up your swarm march, Guan with Alex is a much better way to go than Guan CPO, but it'll be okay if you have Guan CPO as well. William, same thing, right? You wouldn't want to go out of your way to have a William in on your swarm, but it's fine if you have a Nevsky or an XY. It's really going to be pretty strong. William does do some extra skill damage when a target is surrounded, and obviously if you're swarming, that target is going to be surrounded. So William is good in that circumstance, but again, it's not one of those marches where you're like, oh man, I want to get William in on the swarm. It's sort of like, if you have William there, very good choice, go ahead and use him. So those are kind of the things that you should be looking out for there. The other thing I want to point out is that a very common, perhaps one of the best secondary commanders in the game right now is Honda Tadakatsu, and he's going to be on a lot of your field marches. He's just not very good for swarming. He doesn't do any debuffs. He just does a lot of AoE, which again is not what you're going for swarming. He gives some tankiness to your primary commander. So you know, one of the best marches in the game right now, one of the best open field marches in the game is CPO Prime as the primary with Honda Tadakatsu as a secondary. And it's a terrible march for swarming. Like, you really should not be using that march to swarm at all. But I see people do it all the time. So the point here is you really want to be sticking with these commanders when you are swarming. Some of these commanders can be okay if they are secondaries or if they're already part of marches that you're already using. But you should really avoid getting any kind of swarms in with some of these commanders down here pretty much at all costs. I think that's really all I have to say about this situation, the state of swarming right now in Rise of Kingdoms. Swarms are really critical for burning those flags and burning those center fortresses or alliance fortresses or whatever they are. But getting the right marches on there is the way to make sure you get the best trades and to get the most value and to get those swarms down quicker, right? Because the better marches you use, that helps every other march that's hitting it, right? It actually improves their trades. It actually improves the speed with which you burn that flag or fortress. So getting those marches right is really critical. That's it for this video. I hope you learned something. I hope it was helpful for you. I'll post the whole list somewhere. Maybe I'll find a place to put it up online or put it down in the description below. Feel free to comment if you disagree with some of the rankings on the list. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring up the whole list or bring this back up here. But yeah, if you disagree with the list, if you think somebody should be higher or lower, leave a comment down below. Let me know, and maybe I'll reevaluate it. Thanks so much for coming by, everybody, and I will see you in the next one.